Fernandez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We should absolutely hold accountable immigrants and everybody when they commit a crime, especially when it's against a law enforcement officer. Especially when it's against a law enforcement officer. And we had 140 Capitol Police end up in the hospital. Some died because they were beaten in this building. They have now been pardoned. Shame. Shame. We are concerned about attacks on law enforcement. We should be denouncing the pardons of those who attacked the people who protect us in this building. But did you want to?
Well, I agree very strongly with what you just said, Ms. Leger Fernandez. We were, I think all of us were here on that day where those police officers risked their lives, their limbs, their ability to be with their families ever again to save us, to save the Vice President of the United States as a violent mob chanted, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence," and chased us out of the House chamber and the Senate chamber. I think it's scandalous that people who would smash police officers over the head with baseball bats, hockey sticks, Confederate battle flags, and so on, would be pardoned without any statement that they've been reformed or rehabilitated and no longer constitute a threat to public safety and to the members of Congress, our staffs, and the people who work here. So I agree with that completely. Those are people who had every element of due process. They were indicted, they were prosecuted, they had the right to introduce evidence, they had the right to cross-examine witnesses, they were convicted unanimously by a jury of their peers, or in the case of most of them, they pled guilty to their offenses because they were caught on tape, oftentimes by other insurrectionists who caught them on tape. So those people were definitely guilty, and yet there's still people who say that somehow the criminal justice system is unfair. And now, I think, just to score political points, there's an effort to put legislation through which would not even require that modicum of due process, leading all the way up to conviction, but would simply say if somebody is arrested or charged with a minor offense, even if the charges are dropped, even if the arrest is nullified, I don't understand the discordance in approach to our criminal justice system.
Right. And with regards to immigrants who commit these crimes, just once again restating, there is already a process to hold them accountable, to convict them, to deport them. That's already in the law, correct?
That has been in the law since 1996. It has been a strong bipartisan consensus that anybody who is in the country as an undocumented or a documented immigrant, and even someone here with legal status who commits a serious offense is subject to mandatory detention and deportation, and they should be.
Yeah, so that's the law. I want to talk a little bit about some of the maybe intended consequences, because this is the second bill that we are seeing here, which could have very negative consequences for immigrant women. And let me tell you a story. There was an immigrant woman who showed up in an emergency room because she had been beaten so severely by her partner that she ended up in the hospital. But she was terrified because she had been told by her abuser that if she said anything, he would make sure she got deported. And under the bill we passed last week, which was about the Violence Against Women Act, brought by Republicans who voted against the Violence Against Women Act, but they brought a bill with that title. That immigrant woman would be subject to deportation. Looking at this bill here, her abuser would have to do nothing more than accuse her of maybe hitting him back. And if she were arrested but never charged and never tried for that crime, she could be incarcerated and deported. Is that what would happen here?
That's exactly what would happen, and that's why 200 domestic violence groups have written to every member of Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, to say, please don't do this. That bill is going to harm the victims of domestic violence. You're doing it in the name of the victims, but you're going to injure them and expose them to more violence and control by their abuser.
Right, and these are the concerns, it's these consequences that this bill does not consider. Because that's, if it's just an arrest, right, you go up, and this woman who presented, she had been beaten so bad that despite her fear and the threats from her abuser, and she was worried about losing her children, she needed hospital care. And this bill, all he had to do was the threat, have an arrest made, and she'd be gone. And that is scary. And I think that that's what we need to recognize when we look at these bills and we are worried about what would happen. And I know that my colleague from Pennsylvania would like to speak to this.
Yeah, I just wanted to reaffirm what my colleague from New Mexico said. Having worked with legal aid providers for decades, we see this time and time again where the victim of abuse then becomes accused by the abuser and ends up with convictions and thus pitchforked into this situation. So it's not some rare thing. It happens all the time, and it's just one of the ways in which the system that's being pushed here gets perverted.
Yeah, but I would just add to what you've said is that our criminal justice system and our civil systems like immigration have always organized around the distinction between a criminal conviction and everything else. And I'm sure I know my friend Chip Roy is somebody who's very attuned to people's constitutional rights. We would not want to let this certainly slide over to the realm of citizens, that if a citizen is simply arrested or charged with something, they can suddenly start losing their rights, whether we're talking about voting rights or gun rights or anything else. We've always held very fast to the distinction between what is a criminal conviction and what is an arrest or charges, for the reasons that the gentleladies are saying, which is that people can be charged with a lot of things and people can be arrested for a lot of things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they committed an offense, and that's what due process is all about.
There's a sense of fairness in making sure that when somebody is falsely accused and then, you know, an arrest can be made without malintent by the law enforcement. They are operating on an accusation that was made. We'll make the arrest. We'll realize there are no grounds for that arrest, and that'll be the end of it.
Well, in a lot of places, they will have to charge someone if there's an accusation of domestic violence.
Right.
Or they routinely will charge someone.
Right, and so this...
So in a lot of these cases, the woman slaps the abuser or scratches the abuser, or in one case we saw bit the ear of the abuser. And then the abuser files charges with the police or says, you know, she hit me, she started it. She hit me. And so now there are charges against her, and then suddenly she's on the road to deportation.
Right, and I think that there are these things, and that's why convictions are important. That's why the next step is very important. You know, I think it is also worrisome when we are giving states AGs the right to basically determine our immigration policy and determine our visa policy and determine so much of our international policy. But with that, unless there's anything else you would like to add, Ranking Member Raskin, with that, I will yield back.